whole, right? And we must obviously show leadership and example to those who are with us and those who come after us. In the earlier, in the earlier speeches to the accounting profession, this being the fourth, as I say, I stated that the profession needs to reclaim its true north. The accounting profession as a whole becomes threatened when it loses its true north. Unless careful and proactive measures are collectively taken, the personal and institutional integrity of esteemed accounting and audit firms will be threatened and will result in bouts of unhappy endings. I think this was probably fished out from the Sense and Sensibility story lah. But it still applies, right? We must therefore reclaim and anchor our true north, as I mentioned. And when I moved from my first true professional love, which is accounting, I later became a financial analyst, an investment banker, a development economist, a fund manager, and so on, right? But as an investment analyst, when I worked for several global investment firms, more than 20 years ago, as I studied my CFA exam, they quickly tried to undo our constructs by teaching us that cash is king and accounting is opinion. Well, we are accountants. We as accountants would likely also agree that cash is king, but good accounting is indeed a benign and powerful queen, and possibly a bishop, knight, and rook as well. I really think so. And this is where I must say earlier, while we were waiting to come in, I did ask, when we grew up studying accountancy, I think they call it, there was a SSAP, statement of, what was SSAP? Can someone help me? AP is accounting practice, right? S is statement, what's the second S? Cannot remember, show fail. Come on, can anyone? Statement of standard accounting practice, right? So which SSAP was the first one you learn about the, what do they call it? Postulates or principle, right? Going concern, conservatism. And then 5 years tell me prudence left already, prudence gone. I said, macam mana prudence sudah gone? What are we talking about? Okay, what was it? Going concern, prudence or conservatism, accruals or matching, what else? Materiality, substance over form. So for me, I panicked, man. For me, there was one day I was sitting in my very dingy, cheap bed sit somewhere in the UK. That was the day suddenly, aha, I get it now. Reading this, I said, now I get it. When Mr. Cohen and others were teaching me all those, debit by the door, credit by the window, or was it the other way around, and so on, suddenly it all made sense, right? So all these things, console accounts, wow, all very difficult stuff. And now it's like very traumatic when you all tell me all this principle-based stuff all thrown out. Now all this American rule-based stuff is like ruling the roost lah, tak boleh lah. So to me, anyway, you are the experts. My appeal is reclaim the true north. Because only then can we make sense, in my view, with the right sensibility, how we send it forward, to discharge our duty to help the accountability/integrity function, right? So turning to the principles now, just change tack slightly, but it's related. To the second part, which is around sustainability. So the title is accountability. The narrow definition, as we know, is typically centered around the environment and ecological concerns. These are important stuff. The preservation of the only planet that we have ever called home. Yet, of course, sustainability, the notion of shared economic growth, be it at national level or corporate level or the international level, is probably a broader and a more satisfying definition of sustainability. Malaysia's new economic model lists sustainability as one of those circles. The third aspect of this, i.e. sustainability, was raised by Yang Berhormat, Dato Johari Ghani, whom I believe is an MIA member, I'm sure he is. The second finance minister and our board member at Khazanah. At the Khazanah Megatrends Forum 2016, where Yang Berhormat Dato Jo delivered the closing address, he mentioned that sustainability also means balancing the needs of the future without compromising the needs of the present. That's sustainable by whatever definition, right? Therefore, the core value of philosophy of sustainability in the preservation of our shared commons, another related concept, in all its various incarnations of commons, as a national commons that we all share, as an ecological commons, as an economic commons, as a societal commons, or indeed the global commons. This notion of the commons is something that Khazanah had highlighted. Some of you may have attended our Khazanah Megatrends Forum in 2010 with the title Reclaiming the Commons, of really trying to find a shared future and indeed a shared present, right? And indeed last year at KMF, or Khazanah Megatrends Forum 2016, we zoomed in somewhat on the topic again, where we focus on stewardship as a solution to the political economy of location, environment, and demographics. To the question, is geography as destiny, question mark, we deliberately provoked. We did not think geography alone was destiny. Actually, destiny is stewardship. That was the conclusion, or culture, if you like, right? Now, stewardship as posited as the primary solution to the tragedy of the commons, a situation where individual interests and incentives overwhelm the interests of the collective. I think in the classic study of tragedy of the commons, overgrazing, overfishing, or even the collection of unearned economic rents. So, I understand. In fact, over the weekend, I happened to be in Penang and had the privilege of sitting down with a rather eminent artist, a painter, at his home in Balik Pulau. His best friend and neighbor happens to be a fisherman. And interestingly, he said that whenever this fisherman, his neighbor, had got enough catch, he would go home. So there is an ancient wisdom that has been passed down over the ages to this fisherman, that he knows that if he has done enough for his catch for the day, he leaves the rest to nature and to other fishermen and fisherwomen, if there are indeed some. I think that's amazing. So ladies and gentlemen, we have learned so much, but yet we know so little. To the earlier point, we may know the price of everything but the value of nothing. We lose the forest from the trees. Sustainability, therefore, if I can perhaps sharpen the analysis a bit further, consider, for instance, the issue of land ownership, which is typically symbolized by property rights, very important. If property rights are man-made, a human construct, and natural resources and land are God-given, what right does men and women have to own things he did not create? And against this backdrop, I quote from His Royal Highness Duli Yang Maha Mulia, Paduka Tuanku Sultan Dr. Raja Nazrin Shah, the Sultan of Perak, at his opening address at KMF 2015. He posited that, I quote, "It is essential for this paradigm, the paradigm of economics, to be altered in favor of the worldview of individuals as stewards rather than owners of resources. Implicit in this view is the proposition that our right to derive profits from these resources are temporary, and that it is our duty to ensure that they remain undiminished and uninjured for future generations," unquote. How wise. Indeed, Tuanku went on to call for action, so it's not just talk, to move across three paradigms, and in his words, from the paradigm of production to one of preservation, from the paradigm of maximization to one of optimization, and from the paradigm of resource ownership to one of stewardship. How beautiful. I think this is certainly a very memorable line, which we all, I think, should be inspired by and try to aspire to. Indeed, at the micro level, sustainability is therefore the shift from a shareholder-based economy, a conception of an economy as a shareholder-based economy, to a stakeholder-based economy. If we are trustees of the things we hold ownership rights to, then we must seek to optimize the returns, not just to ourselves, but more importantly to the officers or resources or responsibilities that we hold. In the case of business, this means not maximizing only shareholder value, important as it is actually, not even maybe as it is, but to also maximize or optimize stakeholder value. This means caring not just for TSR or total shareholder returns, but also for customers, suppliers, business partners, employees, and society as a whole. Karl Marx famously, I'm quoting Karl Marx to accountants, very interesting. Karl Marx famously or infamously once said that all property is theft. Okay, I admit I've not read the Das Kapital, at least not all of it. And indeed, the capitalist model, the text will say, among others, that the property rights school within the capitalistic model certainly says, in its most pointed form, that all property is an absolutist right. Ladies and gentlemen, actually, in my view, all property is neither theft nor our absolute right, but all property is indeed ultimately in trust. So all property is not in theft, all property is not our absolute right, all property is in trust. Sustainability must therefore go just beyond financial accounting, sustainability accounting. Indeed, as I will discuss slightly later, sustainability accounting is an important evolutionary step in the profession of accounting, which considers an organization's performance at economic, ecological, and social levels, or sometimes known as a triple bottom line, or the 3 Ps of people, planet, and profits. Thus, in building a stakeholder economy, accountants serve as indirect facilitators of engagement between parties that have an interest in the financial and social performance of a company, recording and measuring not just financial data, but also economic, social, and environmental and governance data. So to close this little section on the principle and philosophy of sustainability, is simply that we cannot ignore sustainability, or rather we ignore it at our own peril. That is, I believe, not in question anymore. Social, economic, and environmental megatrends are changing the global landscape and consequently the business landscape. This is perhaps most apparent with the introduction of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which was ratified in September 2015 by 193 countries. Now, to me, this is remarkable. 193 countries, which are so diverse with their various national interests, have basically agreed to put sustainability into the forefront of economic development and therefore a key component to all measures of economic growth, this speech has been distributed. It should not be, but never mind. Is that the press? Yeah, okay, tak apa. Don't steal my thunder. You're not going to post it yet, right? Okay, thank you. Okay. So, and therefore, so the SDG to 193 countries, if you think about it, almost by definition, it is a universal declaration that sustainability, whether we actually do it is another matter, is at the heart of, at the forefront of economic development, and therefore a key component, if not the central component, of all measures of economic growth moving forward. Accountants are key to the SDGs. Indeed, the International Federation of Accountants posits that the global accounting profession is able to contribute to at least 8, although I would question why only 8 of the SDGs, including but not limited to quality education, the innovative ways, as among the innovative ways that accountants can contribute to financial literacy in society, decent work, and economic growth, and so on and so forth. So ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, having perhaps a brief attempt to elucidate and outline the principles and philosophies of the 2 precepts that I was asked to speak on, which is accountability and sustainability. Perhaps more importantly, I now turn to the evolution and how do we relate this to accounting. I submit that there has been 3 major waves of accounting in our collective history. The first wave stretches back thousands of years. Again, Nick, not yet. Okay. To SDG, please. Yeah, I mean, if we go back, again, I'm not going to give a lecture on the history of accounting, but we can trace back to whether it was 7,000 years ago to ancient Mesopotamia, where archaeological documents show lists of expenditures and goods received and traded, or in the 4th century BC, in ancient Egypt and Babylon, auditing systems for checking movement in and out of storehouses, including oral audit reports, in fact, formed the origin of the term auditor, and by the time of Emperor Augustus in Rome. These are all history, and later the famous review of arithmetic, geometry, and ratio and proportion of Luca Pacioli in Venice in 1494, right through to the 17th century joint stock companies, to the formation of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales in 1880, and so on, including the formation of the various accountancy bodies in this country 50 plus years ago. This, ladies and gentlemen, as you can observe, the first way of accounting is really the story of development of mostly financial accounting, serving the very important purpose of recording and measuring financial and commercial transactions. So that's history. The speech text will be made available, I think, gives a bit more detail, but I think essentially that, I mean, it's there for the record. The second wave is where I believe where we are today. The rise of sustainability accounting begins in the middle of the 20th century. Indeed, the development of sustainability accounting over the last century, and especially over the last 2 decades, has reflected prevailing social and political climates. Politics and events such as environmental disasters impacted the ebb and flow of the global community, which therefore impacted the nature of reporting. We can trace one of the earliest instances of greater awareness of corporate concerns that go beyond financial concerns was the case of a certain Reverend Leon Sullivan, a board member of General Motors in 1971, where concerned by the apartheid regime in South Africa, Reverend Sullivan drew up a code of conduct for practicing businesses with South Africa. What became known as the Sullivan Principles attracted a great deal of attention, and several reports were indeed commissioned by the government to examine how many American companies were investing in South African companies that contravened the Sullivan Code. So in a small, medium, or major way, the profession, I believe, through Reverend Sullivan and others like him, I think has demonstrated that with the right thinking, we can drive positive change. In terms of economic philosophy, the tide was also beginning to turn. The eminent economist Milton Friedman, who was, of course, the great champion of pure capitalism, argued that social responsibility would adversely affect a firm's financial performance. And he contended that the valuation of a company or asset should be focused exclusively on the bottom line. In other words, the business of business was business or is business. However, as the world moved on towards the end of the century, the dominance of the concept of a shareholder economy or self-interest in economics was challenged. And there was many, and in particular, a seminal article in the American Journal of Sociology by Professor James Coleman, an American sociologist at Friedman's own University of Chicago, who introduced the concept of social capital into the measurement of value. This gained ground, and we saw in 1998, among others, John Elkington published a seminal book, Cannibals with Forks, the Triple Bottom Line of 21st Century Business, that introduced the phrase, the triple bottom line that we talked about. And there were many studies, Moskovitz and others, that showed good ESG equals to good business equals to good value. So this circle was beginning to get close. And indeed, In 2005, the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative commissioned a report that concluded not only was it permissible for investment companies to integrate ESG into investment analysis, which arguably and more significantly is part of their fiduciary duty to do so as well. So here now we've moved into the domain of fiduciary theory into an almost legal domain, and indeed I understand the latest Companies Act, I am told, indeed the demands of directors sounds frankly quite scary, that we have to look at so many things. Governments have been supportive of this notion. Indeed, government regulation accounts for the largest proportion of sustainability reporting instruments worldwide. In 2016, there were 223 instruments of sustainability accounting issued by governments, 69 by financial regulators, 44 by stock exchange, and 15 by industry regulators, so to those from the government in this case. At a broader scale, the UN is also well known for the principles of responsible investing, or PRI, has come to be known. And this has been true of Malaysia. Bursa has issued amendments to its listing requirements that include the sustainability statement in annual reports. In essence, ESG reporting is now a prerequisite for listing. And about a month ago, the Securities Commission revised the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance to give greater emphasis on the issue of corporate governance, with particular focus on the FTSE Bursa top 100 large companies and those companies with a market cap of 2 billion ringgit or more. As we can see, ladies and gentlemen, the second wave in the evolution of accounting has put the concept of sustainability accounting, incorporating people, planet, profits, and the ESG method into the primacy, front and center of accounting and corporate practices. Of course, we must then ask, how real is the second wave? Or in our parlance, is that more form rather than substance? And here, the answer to this, for instance, in 2017, the ESG Institutional Investor Survey finds that while there has been a global increase in ESG integration amongst institutional investors and businesses, the depth of ESG exposure within portfolio remains low. 80% of surveyed institutions have an ESG component as part of their investment strategies. Only 17 have more than 50% of assets with exposure to ESG factors, and 44% have less than 25%. So clearly there is a gap between aspiration and actuality, of form and substance. This brings me, therefore, to the crux of the matter. Ladies and gentlemen, the vision, or the hope, at least, of the third wave of accounting, to carry on the imagery of waves or curves, I would like then to use the metaphor, now you begin to perhaps see, of the most beautiful, natural, indeed sustainable curve in nature, which is that of a rainbow. The beauty and the hope that it represents of the pot of gold at its end represents hope and our collective human endeavor to continuously strive in order to prosper and indeed to sustain. Somewhere over the rainbow, to me, I see this third wave as the way forward for our profession, our accounting profession, but it is still, as we have discussed, some way away to get over the rainbow. Of course, at the end of the rainbow may be a pot of gold. Actually, if you were to Google the pot at the end of the rainbow, you may actually get this image, Nick. The pot at the end of the rainbow, according to Google, is actually, I'm afraid, a toilet in New Zealand. But, this is a problem with fake news and all this, right? So we don't want that. I think this image is better. Not quite sure from which movie is this, but, this is the pot at the end of the rainbow. Forgive, I'm slightly facetious, but you get the point. If the second wave introduced concepts such as triple bottom line, reporting, and ESG methods, it also introduced them as distinct concepts to also be considered alongside financial reporting. But I think the third wave differs and even enhances the second wave is to consider all these considerations as one measure that we, if I may share, at Khazanah call true value, of a company. So there's a market value, there's a financial value, which may or may not be the market value. That's what keep arbitragers and traders, I don't know, corporate raiders, and others, investors of various tribes at play, the difference between intrinsic financial value and market value, or indeed economic value, the concept that, it's not just, there's a difference between financial and the impact on the economy, or indeed beyond that, societal value. And if you add all those three things up, financial, economic, and social or societal, we define this as true value. Social impact and sustainability accounting does not just sit alongside financial consideration. It is indeed amalgamated with those considerations and is therefore indistinct. As we had covered, a key and continuously universal concept is the SDGs. But beyond that, this effectively, the notion from the investing world at least, the notion of patient capital, or indeed long-term capital, not LTCM. LTCM is a bit of a misnomer. They should be charged for the Trade Description Act. They're neither long-term, got no capital, got no management, right? So anyway. But long-term capital movement, or the notion that investing for the long term or patient capital is seen as desirous, and indeed it is, in this world where quarterly results